Ngalakin Khadijan Nyunga Boja.
So before I start, I would like to acknowledge that we are all meeting on the stolen and unceded Buja land of the Wajak Noongar Bibilan people. I would like to take this opportunity to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and to all the First Nation peoples who are not in this room and who were with us even before earlier. I would like to acknowledge the tens of thousands of years of stories, traditions, and living cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The forgotten stories, the stories we hear, the stories we heard today from Janine about incredible weaving stories, and also how she continues to honor her grandmother and her mother in all that she does. And also I would like to acknowledge the stories that are yet to be told as well. I would like to extend this acknowledgement to all the lands of where our speakers are tuning in from, and the many stories that those lands hold. So today's panel is titled The Power of Storytelling, and we have incredible storytellers and incredible artists joining us that you will be hearing from very soon. And they're very incredible artists who are weaving, molding, honoring, extending, threading, digesting, and translating many powerful stories. So I can't wait to hear the type of stories they're about to tell us. A little bit about who I am. My name is Linda Iriza, and I have the honor of moderating this discussion. I come from a country that recalls its history by citing poems and songs that have been passed down from generation to generation. And I come from Rwandan mothers whose stories are embroidered into the texture of my skin, and I am yet to discover their meanings. I would like to call upon them to guide me in this panel, and for this panel to be as intentional as it can possibly be. So we'll jump straight into the presentations. We'll start with Emele, and if for each speaker, if you could please also introduce yourself and jump into your presentations. Thank you. After Emele, we'll go to Shagheyegh, and then we'll go to Teelah's one.
Vinaka Linda, Dombula Vinaka Malwani. My name is Emele Ugavule, and I am a Tokelauan Fijian storyteller. I'm usually based on Bibbulmun country, but right now I'm on Gadigal country, which is otherwise known as Sydney in Australia. And that's me, Naka.
Thank you so much. You made me want to talk in Farsi a little bit. مرسی از اینکه ما رو دعوت کردین و خیلی خوشحالم که اینجا هستم. My name is Shagheyegh Cyrous. I am also Iranian American artist and curator living in California for the past 9 years. I'm doing multidisciplinary art and curation and social practice works. I'm super happy to be here with you all.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Teelah George, and I'm a visual artist from Western Australia. I'm currently working from Melbourne at the moment. Yeah, my practice largely uses collections and archives as a departure point for investigating stories, whether they're obvious or hidden. And yeah, I'm very grateful to be here, and hopefully my internet connection stays stable. And thank you all.
Thank you so much for those wonderful introductions. And I guess we can jump into the presentations that you've all prepared for us. Maybe we'll switch it up and go to Shagheyegh first. If you can do your PowerPoint presentation where you talk a little bit more about what you do. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to share my screen in a second. Oops, sorry. Can you see my screen? Okay, perfect. I'm really grateful to be able to talk about power of storytelling, because I realized, actually preparing this presentation, I realized how important it was for me to actually go through telling the story, and taught myself basically to speak up and to kind of like share my experiences with other people and other refugees and other Iranians, and specifically Swana region and Middle Eastern as well. Back in Iran, as I mentioned, I doing like multidisciplinary works and doing video installations and trying to create poetic spaces for people to experience different stories that we are sharing together, and how they are tied to political and cultural backgrounds, and how translation and communication are kind of like creating different stories during the time. When I was in Iran, I was really interested, and I was really curious about different stories that are going through generation by generation. For example, my parents had totally different experience when they were living before revolution, and I had totally different experiences living after revolution. So there were similar history of Iran, but they had totally different narration and totally different narrative and perspectives from people from different cultures, different backgrounds. That was kind of like going generation by generation. So I was really interested into that. I'm just like trying to bring, okay. This was actually one of the little books that I created. I call Again and Again and Again. It's kind of like layering how politics is affecting individuals' life, and how me as a person who grew up at the end of Iran-Iraq war, that war is affecting my life, and till today, which this is actually one of the pictures that my brother and I are sitting next to the half-seen table, exact table that my parents were taking shelter during the war. And on top of that is a table that it's a negotiation of 5+1 nuclear negotiation of Iran and other countries. So basically it was kind of like how everything is layered together and how everything is weaved together. So I started to kind of like taught myself that it's okay to tell story, and how important it is to kind of like share different perspectives. Later on, when I came to the Bay Area, actually, I also started to learn more about refugees' life, because I was a refugee, and till today, I wasn't able to go back to Iran for the past 9 years. So I couldn't be able to see my parents or family. So I started to kind of like learning about the bigger picture of like how refugees and exiles are experiencing life, and how they are using technology to be able to connect to their family and loved ones. So for instance, I was also like wanted to not only showing that, but also make people to feel that as well, because I couldn't be able to also find a lot of refugee stories, specifically from Iranians, because part of our culture is kind of like, it was, now it's changing, but it was like not talking about the struggles that everyone's going through. So this was a window to Tehran, one of the, it's a live video installation and live video chat installation that I created in collaboration with a friend in Iran. And because of the time difference of Tehran and San Francisco, I was able to sync the sunrise and sunset of San Francisco and Tehran. So here, this is a window to Tehran that the sun was rising, and at the same time in the gallery, the sun was setting in the window. So I was really into the idea of time and space and compression of time and space, and how you can feel and see basically your homeland sunrise, basically, after a while. This was, yeah, so after, I think that book was kind of like a relief for me to start talking about stories and kind of like dig into different aspects. This is called The Closest I Could Get to the Sun, which is the time that I was closest to the sun on the airplane, and I was coming to the US. And I created this installation right after travel ban. And at that moment, actually, I felt like I had to show how refugees are feeling, or how people are affecting these kind of like political decisions are feeling. So in most of my work, I create an installation and space that people can feel and use their sensory input basically to understand and feel the situation. So here, when people were sitting on the swing, they could hear me talking about why I moved to San Francisco. They could smell the jasmine that was there. This was a live video chat that I did with my mom, actually, right after the travel ban news. And she was just like going through the garden, showing me that everything is here, everything is going to be all right, and you can come back. At the same time, the shadow and light was moving slowly. So basically, people could experience that moment of being in a limbo and being in between space. Yeah, I use a lot. I won't go through this because of the timing, but this is also this is also collaboration with my mom. I do a lot of collaboration with my mom. She's an awesome collaborator. And this was basically, we were reenacting what if we couldn't see each other in the past 9 years. And after quarantine, we were kind of like, oh, what if we see each other? How can we touch? How can we see? And how can we smell? So we kind of like went through that. But one of the, I think past 4 years was kind of like moved me to tell more stories about what's going on, and how really politics can change people's life in a way. This was an interactive video performance, basically. This is past 4 years for sure. Like a lot of people, a lot of Iranians specifically, I'm talking about Iran right now, were facing so many different challenges from the government and sanction in the US, but at the same time in Iran government as well. So people were able to talk about what's going on in the US, but when you were talking about Iran, they were assuming that you're a Trump supporter or something like that. So it was really difficult and challenging to witness that. So I decided to kind of like be a voice of women who are fighting in Iran, and they are basically changing the future of Iran in a way. So this is the picture of women political prisoners. Some of them are still in prison, some of them released, since 2019, but I was projecting on people's face, on audience face and body, so people can realize that this could be them. And if we are silent, if we don't speak up, this can happen to us anytime. This was also another piece called The Sun Will Rise the Next Day. It was a video installation that I did. It was 426 names of political prisoners in Iran who were fighting for women's rights, for environmental issues, for different religions, beliefs, and children's rights, and so many other things. And they were in prison, and a lot of people wanted to, it was a very complicated time in the past 4 years. So I kind of like wanted to show how people can forget about that. So when people were entering the space, they could see the light flashing here. And when they were come closer, they could see all the names, like 426 names rolling on top of their bodies. And some of them were saying familiar names, and some of them were like going and seeing the description. I mean, at the beginning it was playful, but then at the end it was not that pleasant to, you know, witness that. So after this, I realized that me just talking about this is not, I mean, having a piece in a gallery, it's not going to change anything. So because I have also curatorial and social practice background, I felt, and I knew a lot of people in my generation who were in prison, or they had loved one in prison. And this is about civil rights, and this is about women's rights, and so many other issues that were being ignored, or a lot of people were not able to talk about it. I felt that I would like to kind of like create a one programming so I can bring them together. So I created a 1-month campaign where, and this mural in the back, that is 7 women who were in prison at the time. Some of them are still in prison, actually, that they were fought for so many different issues that I was mentioning. And I brought over 25 artists and writers, activists, musicians, and so many different areas. I don't remember right now, but during that 1 month, they were, each of them, they were kind of like showing with performances, with play, film screening, and talk, and different talk series, and also installations that were showing how they were feeling when they had that experience. Basically, this is a window place in San Francisco in Artist Television Access, where 4 artists basically created that sense. Like in the middle, it was a collaboration of me, 2 other artists, one writer, Sahar Delijani, who actually born in prison, and she gathered the songs that people who born in prison just gave to her, and so we were kind of like creating that element. So yeah, anyway, I won't go through that because of the timing. I also lost track of time, but let me actually stop sharing. But yeah, this was some of the works that I was kind of like trying to show today in a way.
Yes, no, thank you so much. And I think it's good that everyone takes notes, and then we can also ask Shagheyegh a bunch of questions, because the work that you do is really incredible. And the theme that's going to be running throughout everyone's work that you'll see today is like an honoring. So Shagheyegh is like a lot of your work is honoring your country, the people, that the political prisoners, and also your mother. So, and now we'll also jump to Teelah's presentation as well. And the same theme of honoring is going to be running in that when it comes to archival work and creating from different archives. Yeah. So I think we'll change screens.
Hello, my name is Teelah George. I am a West Australian visual artist, currently working from Melbourne. My practice largely employs records, archives, and collections as a departure point for thinking about material relationships over time and the stories that are embedded within them. Today, I'm going to talk about a recent solo exhibition that I held at my Sydney gallery, Gallery 9. This was scheduled for March of 2020, which of course didn't go ahead as planned, and was recently held at the end of 2020 in August. So the exhibition is titled "The Boxer is the Lover with the Flower is the Naked Motif." And in this show, I was really interested in using embroidered samplers as a departure point for thinking about how to put an exhibition together and how to explore specific iconographies and processes and material relationships. So I have included a selection of the embroidered samplers of which I became quite obsessed. So this is an example of a really quite old work, and what I became really fascinated in with these is the fact that they are these educational pieces that aren't necessarily supposed to be displayed as the final work. They're very much a learning tool, and quite often were associated with church finery and linens. This is a really good example as well of the kind of accidental composition of the elements in the work, which I became quite fascinated with within the final workings of my practice. And this is another beautiful example of those things. And you can see in this one as well the church iconography that it was very commonly associated with. And these embroideries are in the Victoria and Albert Museum. I was very fortunate to be travelling a lot at the time when I was doing the research for this show. So some of the embroidered samplers I was able to access in places like Belfast, and of course I went to the Historical Museum in Perth and also the Victoria and Albert Museum, but I was able to kind of see what was on display as well as get behind the scenes and go to the collections and see them up close. This is an interesting piece, and people who collect these embroidered samplers, of which there is a small but very obsessed pool of collectors, they are really interested in this little icon, which from which my title is derived. So you can see here the little people, the lover presenting the flower. But in other interpretations of this motif, it looks more like a pair of boxers sparring. So, and you can see this in the bottom corner here of this example. So the interpretation of this icon changing over time, it's almost like a Chinese whispers of sorts. And I'm really interested in that narrative within collections. And it becomes specifically visual with these embroidered samplers, which were very much based on a design that the learner or the embroiderer would then copy, and that would be translated through time. And this is another example here where you can really see the kind of different interpretations of the same icon. And here again. These samplers I actually was able to see in Belfast in the Ulster Museum collection there, and they were very helpful and happy to have me come in and talk about the samplers. This one here is a beautiful example of the kind of the natural vulnerability of textile, which I'm also very interested in, this kind of expression of time that's not necessarily always intentional, but yet informs the material itself, the way it's looked after, and also it kind of exposes some of its narrative, how it's been existing in space. These embroideries as well, of course, being these domestic kind of objects that weren't necessarily intended for final display or collection, were quite often exhibited in kitchens, or they were, kept in the home. So they weren't necessarily, they were exposed to the elements, as you can see in this one here. And so this is the other side of that embroidery, which is equally as interesting and very, very good to see up close. Another example of the same design done with slightly different materials and colours in the same collection. And these are some beautiful linen samplers that I found in the West Australian Historical Museum. And you can see this is done by a school student in 1785. So these kind of little histories or hints at histories that are suggested by
the traces left on these, which in this case are quite explicit, become really interesting for research and making connections with other objects and with time as well. This is a lovely example of kind of deteriorating embroidery. You can see the colour's been washed out and it's been exposed to peat stoves in Ireland. So it has this very specific kind of brown maroon discolouring. You know, these objects I find very fascinating, but as far as being in collections, they become quite problematic to keep for perpetuity purposes. So I think this was actually in the process of being considered as a decommissioned piece. Similarly, this one, you can see the deterioration, the kind of beautiful, clumsy lines and composition as well, which I so fell in love with. And similarly, this one too. And you can see the little holes and attachments and how they've pulled away over time. This is a really good example of that peat aging as well. So this is not meant to be this colour. This is from being in a kitchen with being exposed to smoke. And so this is the part of my response in my show. So this work is the title of the show, and you can see that I have pulled up and tried to play with these little icons and the compositional elements, and also played on the idea of the staining within the choice of colours in the embroidery. I'm also very much interested in the relationship of bronze to the textile and their kind of very different ideas within how they're used in collections, how they've been used in the past. So bronze being this patriarchal, monumental material that doesn't change over time, and textile being quite the opposite, quite vulnerable. But then I'm interested in how I can use these two materials to create this more empathetic situation, and thinking about the idea of support and structure and how they can come together. So within the show, I had a series of paintings and embroideries, each about 46 by 40 centimetres. And this is an example of these. Yeah, and playing on that notion of a sampler, an example, and a repetition of such. So this is them within the space. Installation, you can see there's embroidery, paint, and bronze as well. This work is part of an ongoing series within my practice called Sky Piece series. I am really interested in the idea of representing something as unfathomable and as familiar as the sky. So I repeat this process year after year in this kind of Sisyphean pursuit to do that, to represent the sky. So this is an example of that piece. And, you know, I've recorded it over time and different places that I was. And these works, I was really interested in, again, collections and the relationship between different objects in collections. This being like almost like a cartoon for or a design for the bronze. And this is the final installation of that room with the objects relating to each other. And an example of the paint, the bronze and the embroidery, and how I have used them and referenced my research throughout the show. So thank you.
Perfect. We'll jump back to the Zoom. Okay, hopefully you could all hear that or see it. But no, thank you so much. I think we will jump to Emele. And yeah, a running theme from Honouring is now also researching, which also Jude mentioned earlier too, in terms of how we should make reference of the past and continue on the work that people are doing. So digging through those archives and creating from them is really incredible. So I'd like to invite Emele to also do her presentation, and then after that we'll jump into a collective discussion. Yeah.
Naka, Linda, and thank you so much to our for sharing your practice. I've learned so much already. Let me just share my screen. I'm going to share a presentation, but also I'm going to start with a video. As we journey on the open seas today, we acknowledge those who have come before, those who have stood up, and those who have built the doors, those who stand with us today, and those who will join us along the way. We ask for blessings on this voyage ahead. And our journey home. The ocean, the Tokelau Ocean. So I hope that connection was stable enough for you to get some of the essence of that project. That project was a project that was commissioned by Iriza, which is a curatorial project by B Collective Culture, which is led by a Papua New Guinean artist called Grace Dlavik, as part of the Sydney Biennale in March 2019. And that project, I wanted to share that video because I feel like that is about as close as I can get to representing what the foundation of my practice is, which is community and alignment and invoking the spirit of my ancestors through embodied practice. So that project was a collaboration between myself, a Tongan Australian dancer called Stella Vai, and my community, the Nukunonu community in Western Sydney on Darug country. And we created that performance to honor the cosmological stories that exist within our songs. Our traditional songs are called Hatele, and in Hatele we sing and we dance together, and they usually involve a chorus of maybe 50 to 60 people. So this in this performance, we had chosen a series of songs that belonged not just to our atoll of Nukunonu, but to our neighbor atolls of Atahu and Hakoho, that spoke to our relationship as Pacific Islanders, as Tokelauans, to our seas, to our waterways, and how that is informed by our understanding and connection to our stars and our moon. And that journey to that project actually started a couple months earlier, when I was on a research project in Aotearoa, and I was sitting with elders with my tupuna and asking them stories about just about our myths and legends about their time growing up in Tokelau, because a large part of our population have actually migrated, and there's more of us Tokelauans living outside of Tokelau than there is living in Tokelau. So most of our elders who share these memories of what Tokelau was a long time ago no longer live in the island itself. So I was collecting stories as part of a research grant that was given to me through Australia Council and also through Create New Wales. And through that process, I discovered some stories from my aunties, and one in particular that my grandmother's younger sister told me, which was about when she was pregnant with her firstborn. And she was telling me how my great-grandfather, her father, who was a tautai, a master fisherman, he told her when she was very close to giving birth, to go for a walk and to look out into the horizon and to tell her what position the moon was in and what position the ocean was in, where the waves were, whether they were close, whether they were far away. And so she went for a walk, very far into her pregnancy and feeling really exhausted, and she came back and she said to my great-grandfather, she said, "Oh, the moon is right above us, and the waves were out. It was a low tide." And she said, "Why did you ask me to do that?" And he said, "Okay, that with that information, that tells me, our ocean is telling me that you will go into labor at midnight tonight and that you will give birth to a son." And she did. She went into labor at midnight that night, and she did give birth to a boy. Sorry, that wasn't her firstborn, but when she told me the story, I was so inspired because I was so amazed at how my great-grandfather knew that knowledge. He was a master fisherman. He was a tautai. He has a record in our community for catching 200 fish with his bare hands. And that led me on this journey of wondering what it is in our cosmological connections as Pacific Islanders that helps us understand who we are in the world today, and the role of light pollution in slowly eroding our knowledges, our cosmological knowledges. As a Pacific Islander, I feel very comfortable with darkness. And when I go home to places like Fiji, I know people also feel comfortable with darkness because there are no lights on the streets. And so I was wondering in this process of putting together this project, what it meant to feel comfortable with darkness, but, being led by the stars and the moon and your connection, understanding your connection to them. So that was the initial seed that started that project, and it led to us performing about 4 songs on the Haiveta, this boat which had been refurbished and painted on the outside with Pacifica motifs, so traditional tattoo motifs that belong to different parts of the Pacific. And then on the inside, there were paintings, Pacifica motif paintings that were contributions from the community. And the Haiveta boat was named after Grace's mother. So I'll just share a short PowerPoint, which will also kind of give some context to my process. Let me just share this. So as I mentioned, I worked on a research development project that from the course of, it was granted to me in 2018, and I undertook that over 2018, 2019, 2020 through the amazing support of the Australia Council and Create New South Wales. And that was really pivotal for me in my practice. I had formerly trained as an actor at the National Institute of Dramatic Arts and the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts. And that was my instinct and my intuition gut telling me to follow the journey of becoming a storyteller. storytelling was how we understood ourselves, how we understood our history as voyagers, as navigators. And so that program was called Shagheyegh or Matangi Mai Tupunga, which means exchanging our winds with our ancestors. And so it was a research development program that helped me, as I said, collect stories to be able to understand the connections that I have with my ancestors and the ways that I embody them. And essentially it was a research project that helped me kind of articulate what those things were that connected me with my ancestors, what those winds were, and how I could formalize them and turn them into a vocabulary to use in my practice as a way to work against the Western storytelling forms that I had learned in my formalized training as an actor. And from that, I began to build this vocabulary of foundational values that lead through my understanding of connection to my vanua, my land, but also understanding my positionality as a settler who was studying on Gadigal land, who grew up on Bibbulmun country. And for me, what I found was my core foundational values that I have been able to work through since beginning that project. Hatu, which means a seed. Hatu can also be referred to as your heart, which is, it's really important for me to embed seeds of ancestral knowledge into my creative and community arts practice. Anganuku, which is customs or protocols, which means curating and protocol and conditions for respectful, responsive and safe spaces. Halal, which means travel, traveling and moving. It's important for me to be able to learn and practice and teach in varied and unique ways, spaces and places. And tupu, which means to grow, which means creating opportunities to share that knowledge, build capacity and career paths across my communities and generations to expand our culture of reciprocity. So being able to identify what those 4 foundational values for me was really pivotal in me being able to approach any creative project, whether that was embodied in performing arts or whether it was embodied in digitization, as I work across the creative arts sector in film, TV, and theatre, as well as an educator. An example of an embodied performance that I was part of, I was very proud to produce and direct, is called Te Molimau, which translates as the offertory. And that was written by my cousin, Taufia Pelesasa. I directed that and I co-created that with Aya, who is from Zenith Cast. She's a Waiban woman, Lucina Emele Ugavule, who is my mother, and Tommy Misa, who is a Samoan actor. So my mother is there in the center, and then also, sorry, Malia Letuafa. So my mother is in the center, Malia is on the, I guess, your left, in the blue, and then Aya is the back, and Tommy is in the front. And so this piece essentially looked at us imagining what it would be like for us in 60 years' time. We, as Pacific Islanders, particularly those smaller low-lying atolls, have been told that in our lifetime we will see our Pacific Islands disappear. And so this story imagined the world in 60 years on the final hour of us watching our island sink and go underwater, and what it would look like for us to be the first set of climate refugees having to leave home and relocate in Western Sydney in Australia, where there is a large Pacific Islander community, I think the largest in Australia. And in that process of producing this story, we worked very closely with my Nuku'nono community here, and they were very graciously willing to record our soundtrack of traditional songs that we embedded into the story. And through that, it meant that we were able to find ways to signal to our community that this wasn't just a typical theatre space, but actually this was a space that was made for them to feel comfortable and to engage in cultural protocol that they recognized. So in Tokelauan culture, generally speaking, if you hear a hatele that you know, you will stand up and you will join in that hatele, even if you're not the person performing or you're not on the stage. And so by embedding that into our stories, every single night of our 2-week run, we had Tokelauan people we knew and people we didn't know that joined in and sang and danced with us throughout the performance. Another part of my practice that is really important that I found is in terms of honoring those stories of my ancestors and how we continue it is weaving. My grandmother and on both sides, my maternal and paternal grandmothers are both master weavers. And on this journey of me working in Fiji as part of my residency, I was able to spend every afternoon for 4 weeks with my my budoko, my grandmother, sitting, watching Bollywood films, eating talanoa, sharing stories and weaving. And in that process, she created this amazing woven mat, and I sat with her and watched her skills. And for me, that was a really important part of watching how she designed. There was no pre-planning. All she needed was the colors, the tools, some good food, and some good company. And for me, that practice was about looking at how I understand time, because it is a long process of weaving mats, but also it's a social practice. So how could I think about the way that I engage with time and what needs time, understanding what needs time as a way to resist the commodification of my arts and my cultural expressions. An important part of that process was also my time spent at the Oceania Center of Arts, Culture and Pacific Studies, where I worked with Pacific Islander artists who were part of the Oceania Dance Theatre, and also as I listened to artists who were singing as part of the Pacifica Voices Chorus. And I also was there observing, partaking in their dance classes, and also teaching intercultural theatre workshops. So through that process, we were also able to develop a project, the beginning of a project that has now gone on to be commissioned by Playwriting Australia, that looks at specifically at Fijian mythologies. But it was amazing to be able to work with artists who are fresh and people who had not trained as dancers or in the Western sense of training, and people who had been with Oceania Dance Theatre for 5 to 10 years. And following on from that, I worked with an emerging company which was independent called Vol Dance in a similar capacity. And I was working with young Fijian artists to teach them how to create and conceptualize, produce their own theatrical pieces. And the stories that they told varied from stories looking at social media and the influence of that to stories looking at climate change. And finally, as you've kind of noticed in the theme of archiving, a really important part of my journey as a creative artist is being able to share that knowledge, or at least create space for people to begin engaging with how they can share their knowledge. A really important part of that is for people to understand that, I think for me, that I am just one person who can share what I have, but I am not an expert in any way, shape or form, and I don't claim to be, but I'm happy to be someone here who can listen and hold conversations with them and help them kind of unlock the ancestral knowledge, the genetic memory that exists in them. I think for me, what was super pivotal in my practice was understanding that actually I didn't need to look outside, and all I had to do was look inside into my communities to understand that I had the answers to what I sought in my workspace and the stories I wanted to tell in theatre, film and television. So that's me in a nutshell. Thank you very much for your time, for listening again to everybody who has gone before me.
Amazing. I think we're all like taken back by the incredible work that everyone does. And the thing that keeps coming up, even I think Janine mentioned it earlier about weaving, because also I'm a Rwandan woman, and it's always really interesting the amount of stories that women tell when they're sitting in a circle and they're weaving together. And those stories are also represented in the amount of layers that they put into those baskets or mats that they're making. But yeah, anyways, to the collective discussion, I wanted to, everyone is invited to join in. The first question I had, which is a little bit random, but everyone on the panel has really interesting names. And I would like to also sort of know maybe the story behind your name, perhaps the meaning of your name, or if you're named after someone. And maybe we'll start with Shagheyegh, because we haven't heard from you in a little while. Yeah, what does your name mean, and how do you actually pronounce it properly, please?
Well, I often actually start my presentation with a little video that I created, and different people who knew me for like 3-4 years here in the US, they pronounce it and everyone totally different pronunciation. Even people here, so it's a hard pronunciation. I love different pronunciations because there are different muscles here that different languages have that practice, and not everyone has that practice when they grew up. So I appreciate that actually. In Farsi, I say Shagheyegh, and it's a symbol of love in Persian poetry, and it's a red poppy, which my dad actually put my name, and yeah, and it's really embedded into the poetry in Iran, basically.
Wow. That's amazing, and it makes sense as well because a lot of the work that you do is also quite poetic. When I was reading your bio as well, so and then maybe we jump to Teelah. Are you named after anyone? Even Teelah is a name I haven't really heard before.
Yeah, my name's a funny one actually. So my mum worked on a cruise ship that she's from Melbourne originally, and she was like 17, and I think the cruise ship went to Indonesia and around that area. Anyway, she overheard the name Teelah, and so she decided then, when she was 17, that she'd call her first daughter Teelah, which she did, and she also made the spelling up. So I really have no idea where it comes from. But I have looked it up a little bit. There's a kind of different spelling version in lots of different cultures, but yeah, mine is original, made up by my mum.
Yes. Which is also really cool because that's a beautiful story behind it. And yeah, I think also even my name is Linda, but my mom used to spell it with a Y, and then my dad would spell it with an I, and then they'll fight over it. But my dad won eventually. But yeah, so Emele, and your last name too, how do we pronounce it?
Oh yeah, so my first name Emele is a transliteration of the English name Emily. And I'm named after my great auntie Emele, who through my Fijian side was really pivotal female figure in my dad's life. And my last name Ugavule means coconut crab. So if you ever go to Fiji, there's a famous Fijian article in the Fiji Times about eating the coconut crab, having the ugavule if you ever go to Fiji. And that name comes through my dad, through one of my ancestors, who was the first in our family to sign or be registered through the initiation of the native title in our area where we live currently.
Amazing. Yeah, I feel like there's always such like large meanings behind people's names, and it's really important to acknowledge those histories. And it's also really interesting in the work that you all do. You're acknowledging very powerful histories as well. And because of time, I'm just gonna skip through my questions. The other question I had was for Teelah. Sorry to put you on the spot. But I was looking through a lot of your work, and you have a huge resume of incredible work. And I'm really interested in understanding how the different archives that you draw from or you pull from have shifted. For example, from the work that you did in 2013, which was titled Meatworks Men's Quarter, and also to the work that you presented earlier, which was titled The Box Size, the Lover with the Flower is the Naked Motif. So if you could tell us a little bit about how have the archives you look at evolved, changed, shifted, or even stayed the same? Thanks.
Sure. Wow, I've forgotten all about that show, but yeah, no, I suppose the archive that I started with would have been more of a family archive. So I actually in 2013 got back from living overseas for a few years, and I guess looking at my own personal family archive was a way to kind of reground myself in Perth. And I was very lucky to be able to do a residency at Fremantle Arts Centre at the time, and really kind of be exposed to different artists that were very helpful in kind of supporting me to create this sort of direction in my work. So yeah, it came out of originally me digging into my family photos, family archive, and kind of taking it from there. And I just found through that I became really interested in unedited kind of personal stories, memoirs, and those little elements that aren't necessarily always expressed within collection displays, maybe a little bit more personal and a little bit more unedited. And I kind of followed that lead and ended up going to Wyndham and creating that body of work, but also that style, that way of working with archives. And so since then, no matter what I'm kind of focusing on, I try and let my imagination kind of lead me to some extent, and dig around a little bit and talk to curators and think about material relationships, whether it's, you know, something you're not necessarily supposed to see, like sticky tape or blue tack, and kind of think about how that might relate to the stories we tell and the stories we don't tell as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found it really interesting when I was looking at the your website and finding that work as well, and seeing all the old family pictures. So yeah, it's really beautiful how, I guess, from everyone who spoke earlier, a lot of the work has started from within, and then it has it's became its own thing later on. And to bring back Emele and Shagheyegh, I have a question that you both could answer. You both mentioned your mothers and how you've worked with them in your creative practices. And maybe I wanted, if you could speak a little bit more about your relationship with your mothers, and how do they respond to the art that you've created, and also how do they respond when you ask them to join you onto this creative thing that you're trying to create? Yeah, maybe whoever wants to go first can go first.
Vinaka, Linda, thank you for that question. Yeah, my mom is like, for me, so pivotal to my entire practice. And as I've kind of like developed and worked on more projects, she's become even more central to everything that I do. I think, you know, for me, because she comes from such a like matriarchal culture, and she's also just like a very strong personality and a very determined personality. I draw a lot of strength and like inspiration from that. My mother has always been like the kind of person who reminds me of my uniqueness as a Tokelau Fijian, just even in that combination as well, like being from two different Pacific islands. And so I've always tried to find ways, particularly in the last like 2 years, to bring my mother into my work. And much to her resistance as well, because she's not, she doesn't consider herself an artist. And so even putting her in that play, I pretty much forced her to do, to be in that. And she was a natural, because she's a natural orator, and she's such an awesome person to be around, that she worked really well with the company. But also just recognizing her role as an elder. Like, she doesn't recognize herself as an elder at the age of 60, but she is reaching that age. And so having an elder be in the space, I think, makes a huge difference, just in terms of like disarming people, making people feel comfortable, knowing that like in terms of hierarchical systems that exist in like the theatrical spaces, that I, as a director, as a producer, answer to someone. And you know, the dollar doesn't stop with me, but actually like there is someone in this space that I have to answer to, someone that you can also confide in or just have a yarn or a cup of tea with as well. So my mom's been super pivotal, and I'm very grateful to her for her patience because of that.
Mm.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, I think. Well, my mom is also, I mean, when I came to the US 9 years ago, in 2011, we, because of the way that because of the way that I came here and I was not able to go back in the past 9 years, I think working together was one of the ways that we could kind of like go through and not kind of like seeing that, okay, this is the barrier and this is, you know, this is kind of like a struggle that we are going through. So my mom is also working with weavers from different villages in Iran, which was really interesting when I saw your work, Emele. And we started collaborating through that. So it's a social practice project that we gather stories from different villages in Iran and different weavers who are weaving quilts, actually, that is kind of like fading away, that type of arts. And so based on that project, we collaborated a lot, and little after little, I started like asking, the way that you were saying forcing your mom, I was kind of like trying to ask my mom to, for example, pose something for me, or weave. At the beginning, I was asking her to kind of like weave so I can have some videos and create video installation based on that, and how weaving is also a type of dancing in a way, and harp playing in a way. So I was kind of like going through that and bringing poetry in that sense. I kind of think because I'm away, she's really into collaborating with me, I have to say, but since she's also has that artistic sense, she really collaborates. My dad also helped her. So my dad filmed her whenever we are collaborating. He filmed her, and she also like give direction recently, which is really interesting. So yeah, I collaborated a lot, actually. I collaborated like besides that specific project, we collaborated on different videos, live video chats together, which is I'm really grateful for that, because it's kind of like bring us together and kind of like going through that, you know, getting away from not being able to see each other in a way.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing such personal stories as well. I think the power of storytelling is in everything that everyone has mentioned today, and it's in how it could connect us to our parents, our ancestors, and the times that we like back to the 1700s to the 1800s, like Teelah mentioned earlier. But now we have Q&A. Maybe if you can help me pass the microphone around, and then now my job is done. Yeah, I guess. Let us know if when a person is asking, let us know if you can't hear them for any reason. Yeah. Yep. Does anyone have a question? Yes.
Thank you. Hi, I have a question for Emele. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I just...
Oh, sorry, Linda, I think you have to unmute.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Sorry. Now you can hear?
Yeah, I can hear now.
I wanted to ask you, how did the experience of ritual embodiment change or transform when it was brought into a theatre and into relationship with a whole room full of people of whom many maybe had no context with which to comprehend or appreciate the magnitude of the practice that they were in the midst of experiencing?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a great question, and that's like an ongoing pressure point for me, that the tension between like bringing my cultural practices into spaces that you know, we wouldn't traditionally feel safe in, or feel like has like historically set up a context for us to enter into, so that people do understand. I tried my best to give the audiences as much information as they needed to kind of understand what was happening before they entered into that space. But part of it, I had to part of that process was accepting that they'll never truly be able to understand it. But I was willing to take that risk because for me, the priority was our Pacific audiences, first and foremost, to feel seen and to feel understood in that space. And then from audiences who are not from our communities to then feel moved so much so that they wanted to talk about this or feel like they could action any emotions about wanting to change what our communities are experiencing because of climate change. So it's kind of like a negotiation between like sharing your information with your audience so that they have enough to kind of understand what is happening, but not so much that you give them all the answers so that they then go and do their own research. And I think also acknowledging that no matter where it is or what I'm if it's not just my culture, it might be other cultures. There are so many instances where things happen that I stumble into that I have no idea about or this cultural significance of, and it kind of will always be that way. So I had to kind of forgive myself as the responsibility of myself as a practitioner to relieve myself of that expectation, but also know that there are things that I can put in place to help the audiences.
Thanks so much. That's amazing to hear that. And maybe I was wondering from the perspective of the performers, because I know that I realized from your response that you're accommodating so much for the experience of the audience, which is so beautiful. And from liaison with your performers during the run or maybe after the entire run, what could you say perhaps about how the experience was for them, if it enriched in any way their breadth of experience in connecting with these stories that are so eternal and yet also so momentary too, in the way that they're brought forth in the present?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I obviously can't speak on behalf of the performers, but I was very intentional about how I cast people. Malia Letuafa is Topilawan, and she's actually also one of my relatives. Aya, where Aya is Torres Strait Islander, and that role that she played was a Torres Strait Islander character. And Tommy Misa he's not Topilawan, the character was Topilawan, half Topilawan and half Australian, Anglo-Australian, and he is he's Samoan and Anglo-Australian. So I tried to ensure that there was something that pre-existed in those artists, those humans, that connected them to the story so that they felt, I guess, seen or felt that they could embody it in a way that wasn't like they were working too hard to kind of connect to these stories. And from that, all the feedback that I've received is that they felt like they did feel valued, and they felt like they were seen in this space, and that their offers, their perspectives as Pacific Islanders was really seen, and it connected with the amount of Pacific audience members afterwards that really enjoyed seeing their stories for the first time and the way that they portrayed those stories as storytellers. And since then, all of them have gone on to achieve amazing things. Malia has since started, that was her first show ever, and she started acting in these online series, Pacifica series. Tommy Misa has been commissioned to do residencies on and create more works looking at their Pacifica identity. And Aya is now studying at did Aboriginal performance at WAPA a year later. So it was a beautiful meeting of them already being ready to enter into discovering and connecting more to their Pacifica identity as storytellers. From my understanding, they just use that as a way to kind of move forward and go further with the journey they were already on.
Thank you so much for your openness and for your time in sharing that. I really appreciate
that. First of all, thank you very much for you three. It was absolutely amazing. stories. I love that, all the stories and the board. Teelah, your work remind me when I was a kid and I never could get a needle and do something. And when you see such a beautiful thing transforming people's life and giving a meaning like you talk on, is beautiful. The emotion and the dance and the body's movement from Emele group and this scout are absolutely amazing. But my question goes to Shagheyegh. Sorry that if I am pronouncing right. Is that Shagheyegh? Yeah?
I love different pronunciations. Don't worry about it. Shagheyegh.
Yes. And my question for you is like, I wonder what was your biggest challenge when you are in terms of honoring your culture and yourself and put yourself out there in a country that you said like 9 years that you got into America, is that? And
Yeah.
what was the biggest challenge that you faced putting yourself, and how did you get that motivation to face that, to put your art out there in a big country and coming from such a different culture?
I have to say there are so many different challenges. There are so many. If I want to, I mean, the first one is identity for sure. I mean, I came from an era in Iran where women are suppressed a lot, and there were. It was a difficult time when I came. I came after 2009, the Green Movement. That was a huge new generation-led, I have to say, protest, and specifically artists were targeted at that time because, like because of all the protests were coming out from that, and also, I mean, yeah, identity was the first, definitely, language. I used to write poetry a lot in Farsi. When I came here, I had to make my English better, so I had to leave that aside because they were not really matching. But then I think I found the ways to kind of like weave them together at some point through my art. And the first time, I think one other thing was learning about a lot of Iranians here in the Bay Area, actually, and learning how they faced and how they went through the challenges, because they came from, they came in a totally different era, actually. Right after the revolution, for instance, things were totally different because of the hostages that was happening in Iran, and the tension between Iran and US, which is always continuous. But for them was harder because there were no Iranians here too. So they had to build that community. I was really grateful that I got hired to be a translator for activist project that was collecting stories from the past generations, writers, activists, actors, actresses in all those community who came here. They had to run out of the country in so many different ways, and they lost everything basically after the revolution. So learning how they went through that and learning about those stories was really inspiring for me. And it made me actually become, through my work, that's why actually I really like curating, and also I have that social practice aspect because I love to collect and bring also other different stories too, because these things are so new, but at the same time, in the US, for example, the Black Lives Matter that happened in the past year was really inspiring for our community, because it was the first time that we witnessed in our generation that, okay, this is the way we can talk, and this is the way we can go through. So I think like we are learning, I mean, I'm personally learning from different cultures on how they go through things. For sure they're different, but at the same time, yeah, I think like at the same time we also have to kind of like go around the culture, like old cultural things that are not working anymore. So it's like a very challenging thing it's, that we have to go through. Yeah, that's kind of, I hope I answered your question.
Okay, congratulations to all of you about this beautiful work, and thank you so much for sharing and making those beautiful stories for us. Thank you.
Linda, I have a question. Oh my goodness, sorry. Hi, I'm working, but I have a question because this has been absolutely incredible. And thank you so much to each of one of you for sharing your stories, and your practice. It's incredibly vulnerable and incredibly courageous, and just absolutely inspiring to listen to each of your works. I have a question directed at Shagheyegh. Hi, my name is Elham, and I'm a second-generation Iranian Australian artist, and your whole practice deeply connected with me, on so many levels. And I have so many questions, which with your permission, I would love to contact you afterwards with my questions. But the one thing that's been really prevailing through my entire mind throughout this talk was that being the works that we see from Iranian Australians or Iranian Americans is that it is the closest that I will ever feel to Iran. That I can never visit Iran because of religious reasons, and seeing your work and the way you translate these emotions is incredibly powerful. And I want to say thank you, first of all, but also, how do you feel about this whole thing that our community feels when they see these works?
Oh my God, I got so emotional actually. I wish I could see you first. But yeah, definitely please connect with me. It's, oh, hi. So good to see you. And it's really amazing. I'm speechless now. I think it's challenging, Elham, to be honest. I mean, we can talk for hours like after this speech, but I have to say that it is really challenging. I mean, it is the older generation has totally different experience than our generation, because we live, I mean, I specifically lived for 25 years in Iran and after revolution. So I created so many projects actually to kind of like bridge that gap between our generations as well, because like generation conversations, for instance, like how we can kind of like connect these two generations together, and how can we kind of like answer questions. I also created a stupid question series, which is funny, but so like people can ask like very like anything that they have in mind, because I think there are the differences and tension that comes between people are because of the little details that we don't know about each other in a way. So yeah, we can talk for hours. Definitely contact me, and thank you so much for I mean, stepping in. I got really emotional. Okay.
Thank you so much. And
yeah, good to see you.
Yes. Thank you so much to everyone. And I think we're closing it off now. Thank you. A huge thank you to yourself, Shagheyegh, to Emele, to Teelah for sharing so much. And yeah, I think as we got emotional with the question, the power of storytelling is really that. It's emotional, it's personal, and it transcends time and people. Yeah. So thank you. I'll invite Lee back.
I'm going to hide, actually. I think you've done such a fantastic job, and I just wanted to thank you, Linda, for moderating so beautifully, and also, you know, obviously, thank you so much for the panelists. Did you want to say anything about the residency?
Oh, yes. Emele and myself have a residency, a Studio Kin residency at Lawrence, I don't know the name of it, Lawrence Art Gallery? Yeah, that one. Yeah, Lawrence. Yeah. And it's starting in April for a month, and it's going to be amazing. So myself and Emele are part of an incredible artist agency that she created with other incredible women as well, from New Zealand to also here. So there'll be a lot of work being shown. Yeah.
Super, thank you. But also, thank you, everyone. This is part of an ongoing conversation. There's going to be a second panel, and Australian Taiwanese curator who is based in Western Australia, Ashley Chang, is going to be part of that. And so I would encourage everyone to check that out on our websites and get some more information about part 2, and let the conversation continue. Thank you so much, everyone.